In the previous video, I talked about various approaches to music theory. This brings to mind a problem for music theory teachers today. How do we give our students definitive answers when there are so many different approaches to music theory and so many different styles of music? It makes a music theory teacher nostalgic for the good old days of the 19th century, when there was only one common practice style of music. This is particularly true for harmony. Chorale-style harmony is the basis of functional harmony, and is seen by many music theory teachers as the very basis of music. To see how this works, I have picked hymns from the 19th century, from sources that would have actually been used by the ancestors of my students here in southeast Missouri. Hymns from Missouri Harmony, and similar shape note hymnals. Missouri Harmony was published in St. Louis, Missouri in 1820. It was by far the best-selling book of music in the Midwestern United States in the 19th century. It was part of the craze for amateur singing that swept much of America and Europe. Until relatively recently, I had always assumed that before the mid-20th century, everybody learned to sing, and to sing in parts. I knew that this wasn't true in my own time. In my childhood, only serious singers actually sang. I attributed this to the advent of recorded music and radio. These media allowed people to hear professional singers on a regular basis, and I assumed that this discouraged amateur singers from showing off their humble skills. It turns out that most people well into the 19th century couldn't sing in parts. For example, major church choirs in Germany, by which I mean Prussia, were staffed with paid singers. Churches too poor to pay singers went without. A number of reformers tried to change this. A.B. Marks, for example, had a plan to create a choir in every church. His plan was not to hire professional singers for every church, but rather to hire teacher choir directors, who would encourage amateurs to learn to sing and read music. Similar movements promoting musical literacy abounded in America. One such movement taught amateur singers to sight sing using shape notes. Shape notes aid in solfege through the use of different shape note heads that correspond to the solfege syllables. Missouri Harmony uses the fa-sol-la system, in which tetrachords are assigned the syllables fa, sol, la, and mi, with fa being tonic and major and la being tonic and minor. People schooled in the system can sight read fluently. It's interesting to watch an assembly of shape note singers. They sing a cappella. A leader gives an arbitrary pitch, picked out of the leader's head, with the stipulation that it should be in a comfortable range for the singers. Then, the singers will sight read one verse of a hymn in parts with solfege, after which they will sing the entire hymn with the words. It's a pretty impressive sight, and a feat of sight singing not all university-trained singers could match. My concern here is not the wonders of shape note singing, but rather the music itself, particularly the music in Missouri Harmony. We should be able to confirm by looking at a representative cross-section of these hymns that music in the common practice period was monolithic, all in the same style, and that it conformed to the rules of functional harmony. In order to carry out the study, I assigned each one of the students in my analysis class a hymn tune. I asked them to supply Roman numerals, to critique the voice leading, and to discuss things like key and mode. I kicked off the proceedings myself by analyzing the hymn tune Primrose. I realized early on that this hymn was different from the functional hymn tunes I was used to. While the chord progression did sometimes follow the rules of functional harmony, the voicing of the chords was very unusual. For example, all of the dominant chords were missing thirds. This is a problem because those thirds are leading tones, and leading tones define tonic. In addition to chords without thirds, this harmonization was unusual in its use of 6/4 chords. 6/4s are considered dissonances in common practice harmony, and must therefore be used only in certain ways, and their dissonance must be resolved properly. There seemed to be little concern for the resolution of 6/4 chords in this setting. Note the 6/4 in the penultimate measure. It's not one of the standard types from common practice theory. There also didn't seem to be much concern about parallel octaves. There's a nice set in measure 7 between the bass and the alto. I decided to check to see if this lack of concern for parallels was found in other hymn tunes. Here are the results from one of the most popular shape note hymns, What Wondrous Love Is This? I found 25 parallel fifths and 17 parallel octaves. My students found similar deviations from the common practice in many of the hymns they analyzed. I would like to take a look at the results from 2 of these students. One of them analyzed the hymn tune New Britain. This hymn tune demonstrates one way that these settings differ from 19th century common practice settings. Here's what it sounds like. None of the students recognized this hymn tune as the well-known hymn, Amazing Grace. This is because shape note hymns generally have the melody in the tenor. This hymn also differs from common practice hymns in that it's in pentatonic and contains chords without thirds, like the dominant of the final cadence. The hymn Jerusalem is typical of a different type of shape note hymn. It is modal, Aeolian, and contains parallelisms between the voices. Here's a nice run of parallel octaves at the end. It has a texture that's unlike the common practice hymns of the same period. Starting with the second phrase, the voices enter in imitation. It's a kind of hymn known as a fuguing tune. Note also the liberal use of dissonance. Toward the end, there's a C to D followed by a D to C in the bass and tenor, a ninth followed by a seventh. Of the 8 hymns analyzed by the students, 4 were in major and 4 were modal. 3 were in Aeolian and 1 was pentatonic. Cadences were hard to classify because many cadences contained chords without thirds. Given that, the students found minor 5 to minor 1 cadences in 4 hymns, major 5 to major 1 cadences in 3 hymns. There were major flat 7s to minor 5 half cadences in 2 hymns, and a variety of conventional half cadences in 1 hymn each. 8 hymns is a very small sample size, and yet there's one conclusion that we can draw, and that is that some of the hymns follow common practice harmony and some don't. We could conclude from this that the people who wrote the hymns are musically illiterate, that they didn't know what they were doing. I can't buy this argument. Look at the preface to Missouri Harmony. It consists of pages of explanation of music theory rudiments. The people who published Missouri Harmony wanted everyone to be musically literate, and I would guess that most of them were. A more reasonable assessment of the analyses is that there were multiple musical styles current in the early 19th century, and that, at least in America, people performed them side by side without thinking too much about it. One style matched closely with what we would call functional harmony. The other tradition was modal, allowed for chords with open fifths and voice leading with parallel fifths and octaves. These open fifths and parallels were so prevalent that I can only come to the conclusion that the people performing this music must have liked the way they sounded. It's interesting to note that some of the hymns combine the two styles freely. This indicates to me that the styles were not totally separate. Missouri Harmony and other 19th century singing books challenge the notion that there was ever a common practice style. This is a problem for music theory teachers because music theory teachers often use the common practice style as a justification for teaching functional harmony. We know that functional harmony doesn't adequately describe music before 1600, or a lot of music after 1900, but we believe that there was this golden period between those dates when the musical world was normal, rational, and functional. We also believe that if we understand the music of this period, that we will have a norm against which we can measure all that abnormal music that was written before and after those dates. For me, shape note hymns contradict that argument. They suggest that there was never anything normal about functional harmony in the culture of the 19th century. But that doesn't mean that we have to put functional harmony to rest. Maybe it's not so much normal as natural. Maybe it's what human beings naturally create. We'll talk about that next time.